So a very warm welcome to all of you. A very good afternoon to all our guests joining in from the UK. A good evening to all our guests joining in from India and South Asia. And a good morning to all of our guests joining in from the United States and South America. Today is the sixth seminar in this second edition of the seminar series on the digital future for business and society, emerging perspectives on AI, blockchain, and IoT. This seminar series has been hosted jointly by Professor Yogesh Dwivedi, who is a professor of digital marketing and innovation. He's also the founding director of the Emerging Markets Research Center and co-director of research, Swansea University School of Management, Swansea University, Wales, UK. Our co-host for this seminar series is Professor Ramakrishnan Raman, Director SIBM Pune, Dean Faculty of Management, Symbiosis International University, and Director Strategy and Development, Symbiosis. Our entire seminar series is jointly supported by the Center for Technology, Innovation, Management and Enterprise, that is TIME, the University of Kent, UK, Digital Marketing and Analytics SIG, the Academy of Marketing, Grenoble IAE-Graduate School of Management, a Grenoble INP School of the University of Grenoble Alpes, the E-Business and E-Government SIG, British Academy of Management, and the UK Academy for Information Systems, UKAIS. To tell you something about the seminar series itself, emerging technologies such as AI, blockchain, and IoT undoubtedly offer a transformative potential for the augmentation and potential replacement of human tasks and activities within a wide range of industrial, intellectual, and social applications. The pace of change for this new AI technological age is staggering, with new breakthroughs in algorithmic machine learning and autonomous decision making, coupled with developments related to blockchain and IoT, which have engendered new opportunities for continued innovation. The impact of AI and other emerging blockchain and technologies could be significant, with industries and sectors ranging from agriculture, finance, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, supply chain, logistics, and utilities, all potentially being disrupted by the onset of these technologies. The seminar series on the digital future for business and society, emerging perspectives on AI, blockchain, and IoT presents various perspectives from a number of leading expert speakers to highlight the opportunities and challenges posed by the rapid emergence of these transformative technologies. Today, we have amidst us Professor Patrick McAuliffe from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, Norway, who's an eminent speaker and thought leader in this area. He will share his thoughts with us on the area of responsible AI from vision to business value. To tell you something about Professor McAuliffe, Patrick McAuliffe is an associate professor in data science and information systems at the Department of Computer Science. In the past, he has been a Mary Skolodowska Curie, apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly, postdoctoral research fellow working on the research project Competitive Advantage for the Data-Driven Enterprise, CADENT. He received his BSc in Informatics from the Ionian University, his MSc in Informatics from Utrecht University, and his PhD in IT Strategy from the Ionian University. His research interests focus on the strategic use of information systems and IT business value in turbulent environments. He has published work in international conferences and peer-reviewed journals, including the Journal of the Association for Information Systems, British Journal of Management, Information and Management, European Journal of Information Systems, and Information Systems Frontiers. Professor Patrick McAuliffe, it is a pleasure hosting you today with us at Symbiosis and for the seminar series. Thank you for taking out your time, and may I now request you to please proceed with your presentation, sir.
Yes, of course. First of all, thank you very much for a very nice introduction. And again, thank you very much for the invitation to talk today here. What I'll talk about today is a little bit about some work that we are currently doing, some empirical work, which personally I believe is very interesting and very timely at the moment, especially since we're seeing the advent of artificial intelligence in business, not only in private business, but also in public organizations too. So the idea of what responsible AI is and why it should be important for organizations, I think is quite fundamental. So I'll first start saying a few things a little bit about how artificial intelligence has been looked at in the past over the last few years, saying a few things about both the bright side, meaning the positives and the value that is derived from AI, and most critically and importantly, I think also the dark side and what we can learn from the dark side of AI and what implications this has for when we're managing AI. So as most of you know, we're now in the age of AI. At least this has been heralded as the time when AI can actually move from something theoretical and something that's on paper to something that is actually practical. So basically moving applications from something that has been talked a lot about to actually being implemented. And there's obviously a lot of interest and a lot of hype around this. When you see magazines like The Economist and Time, which are traditionally not technology-oriented magazines, talking about the value of artificial intelligence and how it can change society and organizations, you obviously know that this is something that's it's going to be revolutionary. It's going to change a lot how we do things. And it obviously means that there is a lot of value expected from it. And I think that one of the key points here is that the discussion has been mostly around the value of AI. What can we expect from it? How will it revolutionize the way we do things? What can change in the terms we live? And it has been a mostly one-sided debate about the positive sides, let's say. Since organizations have started actually adopting and using AI, there's been a moving debate about not only how AI will add value, but also how exactly can we achieve this value. So there's been over the last 3 or 4 years, this move of trying to understand how exactly we can organize, how exactly we can orchestrate, how we can manage artificial intelligence in organizations. And how do we build what is called an AI-powered organization? So basically an organization that's able to embrace the power of AI, it's able to make the best of it, and to derive the expected business value out of such technologies. Nevertheless, when it comes to AI, we also see a lot of negative or unintended consequences of AI use. And this has sparked a debate about how exactly this has an influence, how it conditions the management of artificial intelligence in organizations. So just to give some examples, you might have heard a few years ago that Microsoft launched a chatbot on Twitter. The idea was that this chatbot was AI-based. It would learn from interacting with people on Twitter, from the conversations it learned from how people interacted with it. And the key point is that it made headlines, but it made headlines for the wrong reason. So within a few hours or days after it was launched, Microsoft had to recall the AI. Simply because it had learned racist and hateful speech. This is because it learned a lot of these conversations through the interactions with the people on Twitter. And it was obviously getting a lot of information which it was not really intended for. So this basically documents that when it comes to AI, you can have a lot of different negative implications, one of which is this one here, basically a lack of control. So when you develop AI applications that learn from the environment and what information they pick up, they can pick up wrong things, and this can have spiral effects, such as the Tay chatbot. So this has got a lot of researchers and practitioners thinking, okay, AI can possibly bring a lot of value, but there's a lot of risks embedded in actually adopting it, one of which is not being able to control AI applications. Another such issue is one that's been talked a lot about lately, bias. So for example, another prominent case has been Amazon. Amazon also made the headlines 3 years ago because it was using an AI tool in order to facilitate hiring and human relationship management. So basically this algorithm was scrapped because it was considered as sexist. It had some negative, let's say, outcomes towards minorities, from females, other minorities. So in essence, it was not really developed in a way that reflected the values of the organization. And this was because it was trained on prior data. The prior data discriminated against females and other minorities, and this was replicated again in the algorithm. So we can see that a lot of the applications around AI now talk around how you can mitigate bias, how you can reduce bias, and at what stages you can remove this. So again, we see quite a few negative effects and spiral effects from AI use. Other cases where AI has resulted in such negative or dark side effects, for example, there's a prominent case also, you might have followed this on the game of Go. So the team of DeepMind, they developed the algorithm AlphaGo a few years ago. AlphaGo was planned to be an AI that would learn from past matches of top professionals in the game of Go. And in 2016, there was a match set up with Lee Sedol. He was at the time the top Go player, and the idea was that they would set up the AI to play 5 games against the top champion. What happened there is that the AI won 4-1 in the games, and this had some strong implications for the person himself. So Lee Sedol, a few years after this match, he decided to completely retire from professional Go playing. And there's a very interesting documentary, you can find it also on YouTube, about what is the human side of this person that was forced to compete against the AI. So there was questioning around his self-worth and his identity. If a machine can take over what he has been, the person that has been the top in the world so easily, what's the purpose of a person if a machine can easily do what someone is doing and even better than him or her? So AI raises also a lot of a big discussion around what humans are, what humans can do, and what role technology plays in this. Is it supposed to be here to replace us? Is it supposed to be here to make us better? And how should we deal with this? So it's a very deep, let's say, psychological battle within us when it comes to being replaced by machines. Another let's say, negative effect, or one that is at least suggested of being a negative consequence of AI, is the idea of de-skilling. And de-skilling is basically the case where your skills are no longer needed because you are replicated by a machine. So it extends a bit as a consequence of the previous. So it raises the fundamental question then of what are we humans doing in an age where machines are gradually taking over more of what our work life is? What is our role in the society? How can we deal with this? And how can we build a society where humans and machines work together in an optimal way rather than replacing us? A couple of years ago, we started this special issue with my colleague Alice Popovich, Jenny Lundström, and Kieran Conboy. We had an open call in the European Journal of Information Systems, where we wanted to look on the dark side of analytics and AI. And the idea here was that we would try to think about what are the negative or the unintended consequences of using analytics and AI in organizations, and what implications this has for information systems research, for practice, and for policy making. This special issue is almost concluded. Most of the articles are already online, and we're very close to finishing the editorial at the moment, so it will feature as an issue very shortly, probably in the beginning of 2022, in the European Journal of Information Systems. And here we talk a little bit about what are the negative consequences of artificial intelligence, what is the dark side lens allow us to see about how AI is implemented in practice, as well as thinking, okay, how can we mitigate this? How can we reduce the negative effects or the unintended consequences of AI? Of course, we were not the first to think about this, and there's obviously been a lot of discussion about this notion of responsible AI. And responsible AI means how can we introduce a new technology in a way that doesn't cause any harm, doesn't contain any bias, is transparent, is controllable, and so on and so forth. So it's a quite complex notion. It's one that has been discussed very broadly over the last few years. And we see that more and more organizations and institutions are thinking about what responsible AI means and how exactly it can be implemented. Nevertheless, the topic of ethics in AI is not something new. It's been something that has been discussed for decades, if not centuries. So, for example, here there's a timeline of ethics in artificial intelligence, and we look even back in the 30s and 40s when we were still talking of AI in science fiction, and there's a lot of questions raised there about how exactly do we deal with the ethical part of adopting and using artificial intelligence or machines that are thinking and learning. Obviously, since then, advancements in AI mean that we've moved from science fiction to actually implementations, and we're gradually seeing the first effects of what it means to deploy AI in practice, and what are these negative implications, and how should we think about these ethical dilemmas around AI. So a nice definition about what responsible AI is the following, which I found, which says that responsible AI is a framework that documents how a specific organization is addressing the challenges around artificial intelligence from both an ethical and legal point of view. So one thing is that obviously there's an ethical point of view, what is allowed, what is correct, who should be doing what and how it affects each other. And also a legal point of view, which is a bit more clearly defined and articulated, and also relates to the laws and regulations of each country. There's a few questions around when we think about responsible AI, like, for example, what should AI do and how? What are the boundaries of AI, and how should it do things? Who decides about what AI should do and shouldn't do, and what is the accountability behind it? So, for example, if we have a machine that causes or inflicts some kind of pain or some kind of harm on somebody, who is responsible for it, and who is the one that decided? Is it the actual machine that has its own processing capabilities, or is it the designer? Is it the laws around it? Is it the user? There's questions around ethical dilemmas. There's a lot of discussion also in the field of ethics about how machines should adopt ethics, how ethics are a bit context specific and also cultural, how ethics are translated into accountability and responsibility, and then thinking about whose values should be prioritized. So when we think about artificial intelligence systems, one of the key points is that artificial intelligence obviously impacts a lot of members of the society in many different ways, at many different levels, I would say, at the government level, on the organizational level, and the individual level, and societal level. So how exactly do we include these, and how do we prioritize this when we talk about responsible AI? So there's obviously a very, very large debate here. It's very broad. It goes beyond just the field of information systems or even computer science itself. And this is pretty clear when we look at a timeline of documents, or let's say reports that have discussed about ethical or approaches around artificial intelligence. This is a very nice white paper from the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard University. And in this report, what they've done is they've documented the timeline of different reports or white papers in terms of the responsible principles and ethical use of AI from 2016 until today. And what you will see here is that there's been a lot of reports, especially over the last 2 years, and these come from very different actors. So, for example, we have reports from the private sector, like Microsoft, Telia, IBM, Telefonica. We have some from the civil society, like the T20 Think, Access Now, the Public Voice Coalition. We have government reports. For example, we have some from the British Embassy, we have some from the European Commission, from the UK House of Lords. We have intergovernment organizations like the G20 or the OECD, and so on and so forth. So this topic of what responsible AI is and what it means for society and how it impacts us has been discussed at very different levels and from many different actors. I think one of the most interesting one, at least because of due to the fact that I'm working at least in a European country, at least one that is affiliated with the European Union, has been this report from the European Commission. So a couple of years ago, the European Commission published this high-level expert group report on AI, which looked specifically on the ethical guidelines for how to develop trustworthy AI. So trustworthy is one that is responsible and is safe for humans to use. And for this report, they invited a number of different key actors from private and public organizations, ones that held high positions in IT and management positions. And they asked them to think a little bit about what are the key points that responsible AI should address. And they came up with this framework, which has 7 dimensions. So specifically, they noted that responsible AI should entail and should include accountability, human agency and oversight, should have technical robustness and safety, privacy and data governance, transparency, diversity and non-discrimination, and should also have societal and environmental well-being in mind. And within each of these dimensions, they noted that a number of sub-dimensions. So basically, these act as a kind of like key targets that organizations should think about when they're planning their AI implementations. If we look more deeply into these, for example, going into transparency, and you look at this report, you see that there is a few sub-dimensions mentioned. For example, they talk about traceability, they talk about explainability, and about communication. They move on to a little bit on what these mean in practice and how they could be implemented for people that are developing AI systems, and what the implications are both for organizations and for governments. So this is a very interesting document. If you have not read it, I would strongly recommend that you have a look at it. It's openly available from the European Commission website, and you can also find it on Google Scholar. But what's more interesting is when we look at these documents and we see them, we see that there's a lot of overlap between them. So basically, there seems to be a growing consensus about what responsible AI means now. And for example, this is the latest update from Google, and they publish a yearly report on AI principles. And if you look at the 7 points that they talk about here, so for being socially beneficial, avoiding, creating, or reinforcing unfair bias, being built for safety, be accountable, incorporate privacy, uphold high standards of scientific excellence, and be made available for users that accord with these principles. These very closely, not precisely correspond to the ones of the high-level expert group, the European Commission. So we see that there is at least a growing consensus around what are the key dimensions around responsible AI. And this is very interesting. And I think that this debate will then move on to having established frameworks and audits of how companies are actually implementing these principles in practice. So what we've seen so far, when you look at responsible AI in IS, that seems to be a growing consensus about what are these high-level principles, and these seem to be the building blocks of responsible AI. So we have a set of principles that need to be adhered to. There is a discussion around responsible AI up to date, but it isn't discussed in terms of governance. So governance is quite different from pointing principles. So principles are basically targets which you need to achieve. Governance is basically talking about a plan and a set of let's say, procedures and structures that need to be set around developing technology in order to be able to align with these principles. So there's a mismatch here in terms of like the levels of which we're talking around. There is also a lot of discussion when we talk about responsible AI, since it corresponds to different levels and different actors within organizations or throughout organizations. And one of the key issues that they're not associated with any specific outcomes. So when we talk about responsible AI, we talk about them in a bit of a dogmatic way. So organizations should strive to achieve for responsible AI when they're implementing artificial intelligence. But there isn't very much discussion about why they should do that and what is the value of it. And I think that this is something that needs to be talked about a bit more in depth. So what I want to talk about now are some ideas. I basically don't want to provide an answer, but maybe to spark a little bit of a discussion here about how we can move from these principles of responsible AI to governance. So how do we govern AI projects? And if we go back in IS literature, there is a long history of talking about IT governance. And IT governance has been conventionally defined as a process that ensures that effective and efficient use of IT in enabling an organization to achieve its goals. So if we think of AI as a subset of the IT that is used in an organization, we can think of AI governance as requiring also some processes and structures in order to be able to achieve these goals of responsible principles. Again, when it goes to IS literature, we typically have thought of IT governance as having three elements. So we think about structures. Structures correspond to what are the roles and responsibilities that each person has in an organization. So when it comes to IT governance, what are the responsibilities? Who's responsible for specific actions around IT? What are the roles around it? What are the accountabilities and so on? We usually have processes, so things that document how things should be done. Like, for example, how do we plan for strategic information systems planning? How do we achieve service level agreements? How do we achieve IT alignment and governance maturity? And finally, we have relational mechanisms. So these define what are the partnerships, what are the collaborations, how do different functions within organizations talk to each other, and so on. So there is a pretty well-defined, let's say, literature, and it has a long history of talking about how IT should be governed. But we're now lacking this link about how responsible AI should be converted into governance. Like, what should we do in order to be able to achieve these principles? Then there's even more specific, let's say, subsets of governance. For example, this article of Talon, Ramirez, and Short in 2013 in the Journal of Management Information Systems documented what it means to have information governance. And when we think about information governance, this is basically, again, a subset of IT governance. It's more concerned with how do we deal with the data artifact in organizations. And that's a very core part of developing artificial intelligence. And again, you see that we have the same kind of distinction into structural practices, procedural and relational practices, and we have a different set of requirements there. So each of the bullet points corresponds to a different part or a different aspect, which is important when we talk about information governance. And there's obviously some enablers and inhibitors in doing so, and some consequences. So when it comes to artificial intelligence governance, we seem to have many different perspectives, and this is quite interesting. So when we look at, for example, people in software engineering and machine learning, there is this report from Microsoft that was published in the IEEE conference on software engineering. And here they think about governance as the process of deploying, from how do you go from an ideation, an idea of what AI should be, to actually implementing and monitoring. And you see that there is quite a sequential, step-by-step approach of defining what are the model requirements, collecting data, cleaning them, and then going down to model monitoring. So in their conception as data scientists and software engineers, AI governance means the following set of steps. It doesn't talk very much about who does what. It just talks more about what are the different stages that need to be addressed. There is obviously different perspectives in this. For example, there is, you probably have heard of CRISP-DM before. It's a data mining process. It's been used from data scientists for many years, and there's obviously adaptations to this. And this was an interesting one that I saw recently. It was an adaptation for machine learning projects. So again, here we see a sequence of steps, like from business understanding to data understanding, preparing data, modeling, evaluating, deployment, and model management. So they kind of correspond a little bit to the different view that I showed before. And what's interesting with this method that they've adapted is that then they've gone a step further, and they've looked at what each of these processes basically entails. So for example, what does business understanding means? It means determining business objectives, analytics outcomes, assessing situations. So we see how we can start breaking down how you develop AI into a series of sub-steps. And if we take this a step further, then we see that for each of these steps, we can identify a number of business roles, a number of roles, like for example, the business analyst, the data scientist, the data engineer, and map them onto the different steps. So who is responsible with an R, who is controlling that one, who is accountable, and who is informed. So the different letters correspond to these. And this gives us a bit of a framework then to see, okay, here's a process that we need to follow if we want to govern AI and to deploy AI. Here are the different roles that we have, and here are the different, let's say, processes or accountabilities or activities that each person needs to do within each of these steps. So this starts to unfold then a little bit again the dimensions we saw before, like the structures, the structural, procedural, and relational mechanisms. So it puts the context of AI governance a little bit, it makes it a little bit clearer. But what we haven't seen so far yet is how exactly in all of this, in all these processes, all these roles, all these activities, do we embed responsible principles of AI? So how do we control for these, and how do we make sure that what is the end product basically is a responsible AI? So the questions then that are asked are, how should AI be managed responsibly? So within this process of managing AI, how exactly do we ensure that there is no bias? How do we ensure that it's fair? How do we ensure that the process is transparent and explainable? How do we ensure that there's no harm done to anybody? How do we also consolidate these different perspectives? So for example, we saw that there's many different actors here and many different ways of seeing governance, depending on if you're a data scientist, if you're a software engineer, if you're a business analyst, and so on. So how do we make this into one universal framework that everybody agrees on and everybody can understand the goals and the aspirations of each other? Then what implications does this have for the different stakeholders? So what does this mean, for example, for managers managing AI projects? Should they be held accountable for some things? At which point? And what kind of activities should they need to control for that? For data scientists, how does this change their activities and what they're doing? And the last key point is that when we think about responsible AI principles and trying to embed them in the governance of AI, is this really an extra obstacle or is it an opportunity? Because it's mostly talked about as something that there's another barrier that you need to overcome. So when you're developing or deploying an AI, it's not only enough that you develop an AI that can help you hire people or chat with more people online if you're a company, but you need to be able to do it in a way that doesn't, let's say, have negative or unintended consequences. So most of the discussion, I believe, has been around that responsible AI is more of a barrier rather than an opportunity. And I would like to say a few words now about why I think it is also an opportunity and how exactly we should be studying this or how exactly we should be looking into it. So the last part is, how do we move from principles to value? So how can we think about responsible AI, not as a new set of requirements or something that's restricting the deployment of AI or delaying it, but something that can also add value for organizations. So there is a very large literature around what is called corporate social responsibility. And corporate social responsibility has to do with in which ways and how companies, when they are socially responsible, they benefit. And this stream of research, it hasn't been really linked to information systems research or AI research yet. But I think that with the prevalence of responsible AI, there's now the time to actually talk about this a bit more in depth. So for example, there's a long, very extensive body of work around benefits of corporate social responsibility. And I think that this aligns very nicely with responsible AI. So for example, I can see that in the next few years, when we talk about companies that are actually deploying and using responsible AI governance frameworks, they will be able to achieve a whole lot of value. For example, increase their customer retention, saving money on energy and operating costs. So if, for example, you take into account these principles when you're developing AI, and your customers or your business partners are aware of this, this will have positive effects and will have some ripple effects thereon. So for example, we see this also with brands now that are have a social or an environmental responsibly strategy. Like for example, clothes brands like Patagonia and so on that claim to be using materials that have a low carbon footprint or that are reusable or are durable and so on. This has positive effects in terms of like winning new customers over, having more profitability, better relationships with their customers and so on. So my view is that when we talk about responsible AI and the future of responsible AI and companies that are actually doing it and advertising it, this will have several positive effects. So the corporate social responsibility literature would be a very interesting way of trying to measure these. Another value out of implementing responsible AI practices is that I believe that it will have an effect also on what companies are doing internally. So there is this notion in organizational science of inertia, and inertia is basically the inflexibility of companies when they are stuck in doing something, or they have the inability or unwillingness to change what they're doing. And usually when you have high inertia, you have disengaged employees, you have pushback, you have little desire to change, you have lack of initiative and so on. And when there's low inertia, there's more flexibility, more risk-taking. So my view is that by implementing responsible AI governance practices, organizations will be able to reduce the level of inertia that they have. So for example, when you have clear and documented processes about how AI is developed, who is accountable, have more transparency, not only in the data, but also in the processes, have clear rules and regulations about safety and security and access to data and algorithms, have very clearly defined ways of explaining outcomes, and they're automated. This will reduce the level of inertia in organizations, and they'll be able much faster to adapt to the changing environment. So this is a second point, which I believe will be very interesting for future researchers to look into. Like, what is the effect of adopting responsible AI governance in the internal clocks and rhythms and flexibility of organizations? Another very similar one is looking at knowledge flows. So there's a lot of literature around what is known as absorbed capacity, which is basically an organizational propensity of being able to not only acquire new knowledge, but also assimilate it and use it and exploit it in new opportunities. So I believe that companies that are able to actually use and deploy responsible AI practices will be able to have higher absorbed capacity too. Firstly and primarily because responsible AI requires that there is clear and transparent knowledge flows and data flows. There's more formalization in the processes of how data is collected and how data is transformed and how data is used. So this, I believe, will have ripple effects in how knowledge-intensive organizations are. So it wouldn't be that AI is developed in a black box. We don't know very much about either what is going into it, how it has been actually processed, and how it has been used. But there's more transparency in this, and this transparency will have then effects on the knowledge within the organization. And finally, a key point, which I believe is very interesting, is seeing how humans and technology work together. So there is this notion of conjoined agency. There's this very nice article in the Academy of Management Review. It was published very recently. And they talk about different forms in which humans and technology can work together. So one of the key points is that if you want humans and technology to work together and to optimize the strengths of each other, you should develop appropriate ways of doing so. And when we think about responsible AI basically dictates that you should be able to develop technology that doesn't put into danger the autonomy or the agency of humans, that rather amplifies the positive effects of each other. So just to give you an example, before I talked about the case of Go, the game, and how AlphaGo managed to beat the world champion at the time, Lee Sedol. One of the positive aspects that emerged after this is that people that were working in AlphaGo, and also Lee Sedol himself, after playing with AlphaGo, they actually used this as a training mechanism, and this training actually made them better Go players. So after the match with AlphaGo, Lee Sedol was able to win a series, a strike of follow-up matches with other humans. So we can see then that it enables humans to think and to act in ways that are different from what they are typically used to. So I think that there's a good opportunity when designing AI to think about how we can actually amplify the strengths of humans, not only in cases of games like the one I mentioned, but also in cases of organizations. So how do we actually use the strengths of humans and technology in order to make life better for us? And I think that this is going to be a very interesting and prominent research theme. There's obviously a lot more to discuss about responsible AI and how responsible AI will roll out in practice and governance. But I hope with this, I was able to open up a little bit of the discussion and spark a few thoughts out there about where the future of responsible AI is going and how this will impact organizations, not only in what they need to do, but also in the value they would gain. So with this, I would like to conclude, and I would like to thank you very much for your attention and looking forward for the discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Micallef. That was a fantastic talk. In fact, my first thoughts were, wow, this is eye-opening, like, and not just about from a research perspective, but even from a human development angle. And, one of the points that you mentioned was social regression. So are we actually going back, and as human beings, are we ever going to be, out there and in front when a machine can definitely do your tasks like hundreds of times better? Professor Micallef, even as we get questions coming in, before that, I would want to pose a question to you on this front. While some of the examples that you cited of the dark angles of, using AI, or implementation of AI in human life, most of them were how the machine beats the human. Are there situations or possibilities where the very need for a human intervention becomes non-existent? I have seen machine learning models where the model defines itself and overcomes its own errors and goes ahead with time. So while that is confined to a research setup, can something like that extend to a human AI interaction in real life? What are your thoughts on that, sir?
So if I understand the question is, if there is cases where AI can basically obliterate completely the need for humans in the process. Yes. And I think that's a good question. And I think that we are seeing this in some cases. For instance, when we look at processing of different types of applications or different types of, let's say, especially with government agencies, we see this quite a lot in Europe, like in the case where you're applying for a benefit or you're applying for a position for a school, in school for your kid, or for parental leave or something similar. There usually is a quite lengthy manual process where a human would look at the different documentation, check that everything is okay. And that would take a lot of time usually, and maybe there is also some bias involved from the human side. I think that we are now seeing a lot of cases where AI is stepping into this. It's a pretty clear and well-defined, let's say, decision-making process that's involved. So you just have to set the rules, and then AI can basically replicate what humans are doing and even improve on it. So you don't have any need for humans to be in the loop. It's completely automated, and it's maybe even more efficient than before. So I believe that there is obviously a lot of cases in this. Also in the case of manufacturing, for example, you see a lot of robotic process automating. There, for example, robots can be much more efficient and much more, let's say, detailed than humans. They are not prone to fatigue, for example, like humans are. They're not prone to error, they're programmed in a specific way and they don't deviate from that. So I do believe that there is a lot of room for replacement of human tasks from machines, from AI. I know that this is something that it sounds quite scary for a lot of people, but if you think about it, also in the Industrial Revolution, a lot of manual tasks were replaced from machines. Now we have machines that are automating different types of tasks, obviously more information-based ones. But again, I think that this is something that will inevitably happen. And I don't think I'm one of these people that doesn't think that it will have a negative effect. It will take some time to go through and some, let's say, turbulence, but I believe that it will have higher productivity outcomes.
Thank you for your thoughts, Professor Micallef. Okay, we have participants. If you have any questions, you may post them in the chat window. We'll wait for a couple of minutes, maybe, for any questions.
I can also say here that if some people think about some questions after the presentation, please feel free just to send me an email. My email address is linked here in the last slide. So I think that a lot of people might be thinking about something and not have enough time to post a question. So please feel free to get in touch with me. If you have a question or if you have some thoughts, I would be happy to discuss them at any point.
Okay, so there is a question by Dr. Roba Abbas, who's also one of the speakers in the seminar series. Thank you, Professor Micallef, for a thought-provoking seminar. In addition to linking to CSR, do you have any thoughts on immediate next steps that will assist in realizing the vision of responsible AI in an organizational context? For example, how can we change the narrative that ethics and responsible AI stifle technological progress?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I agree that there is this narrative that ethics is something that constrains technological progress rather than helps it. I think that the best way to think about this is to think about the counterexamples. So the ones that I mentioned in the beginning, for example, the chatbot, the AI chatbot on Twitter of Microsoft. This was basically implemented without any measure of control with it, and what that led to was that it was completely scrapped. It wasn't reused again. So basically, the lack of responsible AI practices and the lack of ethics or control integrated into this chatbot were what made things go sour. The same goes for the AI-based hiring algorithm in Amazon. So that was completely also scrapped off afterward, not because the AI itself had bias embedded into it. It's probably because there was bias already in the process. This AI was the one who was able to show it. It's like a magnifying glass showing in what is happening. So I think that if I were to argue why AI should be actually implemented, despite this ethical concerns, is that a lot of times AI can act as a magnifying glass into what is happening and we don't know it already. So this allows us to reveal some weaknesses that are happening in physical processes or in actual settings. So this is a good case to allow us to see into it. On the other hand, also the side of ethics, when it comes to the case of the chatbot by Microsoft, I believe that in this case, being able to embed some of the key principles and some of the key controls when you're developing it in different stages will allow you not to have such negative effects when outcomes emerge. So in the long term, this will have a positive effect in being able to deploy technology rather than constrain it. I hope this answers the question.
Thank you, sir. There are a couple of more questions which have come in. One from Azuka Mordi, who says, thank you for your presentation. I would be interested on your view of enforcement of the principles. In reality, we often experience deviations between idea and execution applies to many areas. how do we ensure that dominant players, private and government, adhere to the agreements, not only on the outside, but also in the black box?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And that's something that I think is probably going to be, let's say, the next level in when we talk about responsible AI principles. So now they are basically a bit declarative. There's like a list of commandments that somebody should follow without anybody checking on them. And I recently saw that there were some agencies that do some audits on organizations and checking how well they adhere to this, and they give a certain level of certification. So I think that by being able to move from responsible principles to being responsibly governing AI, that would be the first step in actually implementing these things in practice. And from the point when there is accreditations given in terms of how responsible your AI is, this will also allow companies to more strictly follow these principles. When they know that there is a regulating agency or that they get an accreditation, which is positive for them. Again, going back to the point of corporate social responsibility, if you know, for example, that Facebook has been checked, for example, by an accreditation agency, and there's transparency, there's accountability, there's responsibility, there's safety and security implemented on all levels, this will have a positive effect on usage from individuals. So I think that this is probably going to be the next step, moving from responsible principles to being accredited and checked, just as you have accreditation in different industries. So this is my personal view of how things will ensure that the dominant players actually follow these principles.
Very true, Professor McAuliffe. There's another question that comes in from Lucas Euryptis, who says, a similar discussion takes place in the e-government domain, degree of public servants' discretion. What do you think?
Okay, I'm not sure I understand what the degree of public servants' discretion means.
I presume would, okay. We'll move on to another question by Charles Tennis.
We can come back to it.
Yes,
maybe you can clarify. I guess you mean the similar discussion takes place in terms of like how you can ensure responsible use of AI. I've been working a little bit also in the government sector, and I think at least from some first things that we've seen in the e-government domain, is that AI responsible practices, at least, are something that kind of they feel a bit restrictive for public bodies, and they feel restrictive because at the moment they are very high-level principles that need to be followed. There isn't any clear idea about how to do so. So from the moment when you try to convert these principles into governance practices and actually tangible things that you can do in each step of the process when you think about AI management, then it becomes a bit clearer also for public bodies, because I guess public bodies are a little bit usually slower in technology adoption, and they need a few more clear guidelines and to adhere to regulations much more strictly than the private ones. At least this is what I've observed in our studies in public bodies.
Thank you for that explanation, Professor McAuliffe. We have another question from Charles Tennis, who says, thank you for a very interesting presentation. Can AI be friendly, and is it responsible to make it seem so?
That's a good question. Friendly is an ambiguous term, and I think that there is a part within these responsibility frameworks that talks about AI being able to communicate, that it's AI communicate in a clear and concise manner. I guess that when it comes also like to explaining outcomes, and especially in cases where outcomes are not what people expect, in case like a court decision that is AI based, for example, then it's very important to be able to develop AI that also plays with the emotional part of humans and play with it, meaning that it takes it into account and accommodates for this. So I think that friendly is important. It shouldn't be cold and let's say a black box that just delivers a decision. So taking into account how the design of AI can accommodate this friendliness, that as humans we like it. We like people that are friendly with us. We don't like people that are cold and distant to us. I think it's important. Is it responsible? That's also a big debate, because you can be friendly in a way of manipulating, in a way, or of a way of I would say maybe trying to play with someone's feelings in a way that benefits you. But I think it's important when we take into account how AI communicates with humans, both in the direct communication and in terms of the explainability, that it takes also into account the psychological factor, and friendliness and being friendly with humans and open is important. And I think that should be something that is embedded in the design. And I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Mikhailov. And in fact, my personal thoughts has been one of the most eye-opening, presentation. So wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. Also, you touched upon very key points, especially on the negative usages of AI, of how it can grow unfettered if not governed properly, and proper governance in AI is required, especially to increase the value that can be derived from it. Thank you very much, Professor Mikhailov, for taking out your time.
Thank you very much also for having me.
Absolutely. All our pleasure.
Thank you so much. We will be in touch. You will also get the recordings of this session, sir. It will be nice if you can possibly post this on your LinkedIn and tag SIBM as well. And we'll surely keep in touch. Thank you, Professor Santosh, for hosting. And this was a wonderful session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you too. Thank you too.
Thank you all.